The quiet hum of existence surrounds us, a constant backdrop to our lives, yet we often forget the invisible architecture that shapes our every thought, every interaction, every understanding. This architecture is language, a tapestry woven from words, grammar, and meaning, allowing us to build shared realities, explore abstract ideas, and transmit knowledge across generations. But what if this fundamental pillar of human experience had never arisen? Imagine for a moment a world where the very breath of articulated sound, the intricate dance of syntax, and the labeling power of vocabulary simply cease to be. What would remain? How would humanity navigate its days, its needs, its deepest feelings in a profound and permanent silence of the spoken word? Picture a dawn unlike any we know. The sun crests the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose. And as the light spills over a primeval landscape, figures stir from their slumber. There are no whispered greetings, no calls to action, no recounting of dreams. Instead, communication unfolds through a rich, intricate ballet of the body. A hand reaches out, not to grasp, but to trace a gentle arc in the air, a movement that signifies a shared intention to move towards the rising warmth. A tilt of the head, a softening of the eyes, conveys an unspoken reassurance, a deep, empathetic connection that needs no verbal confirmation. This is the world of the sensory communicator, where every muscle twitch, every shift in posture, every minute flicker of expression carries immense weight and meaning. In this silent dawn, understanding is not built upon definitions or explanations, but on direct, immediate sensory input. The scent of wood smoke drifting from a nearby fire, the warmth of a shared embrace, the crisp taste of berries gathered from a bush. These are not merely experiences, but elements of communication. A person might point with their chin towards the berry bush, their lips slightly parted in anticipation, while their hand gestures a plucking motion, their eyes wide with invitation. The recipient of this unspoken message doesn't process words like, "let's go pick berries," but rather a cascade of sensory information that instantly translates into a shared desire, a collective intention. The environment itself becomes a critical component of the dialogue, with landmarks, sounds, and even the subtle changes in weather serving as unspoken cues. The air might be filled with sound certainly, but not with language as we understand it. There would be the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the gurgle of a stream, and human sounds too. Not words, but nuanced vocalizations. A low hum of contentment, a sharp intake of breath signaling alarm, a gentle coo of comfort, a resonant laugh that ripples through a small group, uniting them in shared amusement. These sounds are raw expressions of internal states, immediate and unfiltered. They carry the weight of emotion directly, bypassing the conceptual filtering that words often impose. Imagine a child stumbling and crying out not in words of pain, but in a pure, unadulterated wail that immediately draws the attention and empathy of those nearby. The response is not a verbal question, but a swift, comforting touch, a protective posture, a shared mirroring of distress that fosters immediate connection and care. Without the labels and categories that words provide, the world is experienced in a profoundly different way. A tree is not simply a tree. It is this specific tree, with its unique bark texture, the particular way its branches sway in the breeze, the individual pattern of sunlight filtering through its leaves. There is no abstract concept of forest or vegetation, only a collection of intensely perceived individual entities. This lack of linguistic abstraction roots humanity deeply in the present moment, in the immediate, tangible reality. The past exists only as memory images, perhaps triggered by familiar sights or scents, and the future as an intuitive anticipation of immediate needs, hunger, thirst, shelter, rather than a complex planned trajectory. Consider the intricate dance of a hunting party. There are no whispered strategies, no complex battle plans articulated in advance. Instead, the hunt proceeds through an almost telepathic coordination, a symphony of shared attention and intuitive understanding. One hunter might lower their stance, their eyes fixed on a distant movement, and the subtle tension in their body, the slight shift of their weight, instantly communicates a need for caution to those observing. Another might make a small, precise hand movement, indicating a direction for flanking, a gesture understood not as a command, but as a suggestion, an invitation to a shared action that resonates with the collective goal. Success in such endeavors relies heavily on prolonged, intimate shared experience, on knowing the patterns and tendencies of each individual within the group, with a depth that words could never fully capture. This deep reliance on non-verbal cues means that social bonds are forged through an intense, unbroken stream of shared presence. There are no formal introductions, no narratives of personal history. Trust is built through countless moments of mutual support, through the mirroring of emotions, through the visceral experience of another's reliability. A look of concern, a hand offered in assistance, a shared moment of relief after a successful forage. These are the building blocks of community. The collective consciousness of these groups isn't an abstract ideal, but a living, breathing, felt reality, where individual well-being is intrinsically linked to the well-being of the group, understood through an unspoken empathy that runs deeper than any verbal contract. The absence of an inner monologue, the constant stream of words that often fills our own minds, would dramatically reshape the inner world of these humans, the inner world explorer. Thoughts would likely be experienced as a flow of images, sensations, and raw emotional impulses. Imagine pondering a problem. Instead of forming sentences to analyze options, one might see potential solutions as a series of mental simulations, feeling the rightness or wrongness of each path as an internal physical sensation. Decision-making might be quicker, more instinctual, less burdened by linguistic overthinking. The self would be less defined by a narrative identity constructed through words, and more by a direct, unmediated awareness of one's own existence, one's connection to the body, and one's immediate environment. This is the realm of the unbound perceiver, experiencing the world in a raw, uninterpreted state, where the boundary between self and environment might feel less distinct. Imagine trying to convey something as complex as love or loss without words. It would not be expressed through poetic verses or declarations, but through an overwhelming surge of shared feeling, a profound resonance of two beings, the gentle caress, the prolonged gaze, the shared silence, the mirroring of sorrow in a moment of grief. These would be the conduits for the deepest human emotions. The intensity of these non-verbal expressions might even surpass the depth conveyed by words, precisely because they bypass intellectual interpretation and speak directly to the emotional core. The full spectrum of human feeling would still exist, vibrant and profound, but its expression and reception would be entirely different, relying on a heightened sensitivity to the subtle cues of the body and the immediate energy of interaction. So, in this silent dawn, humanity is not diminished, but transformed. The absence of language does not equate to an absence of thought or feeling, but rather a different mode of experiencing and expressing them. It is a world where every gesture is a sentence, every sound a raw emotion, every shared glance a paragraph of understanding. It is a humanity deeply rooted in the tangible, the immediate, the sensory, with an intuitive grasp of the world unmediated by the labels and categories that words naturally impose. This is a world of direct perception, where the nuanced movements of a hand, the precise inflection of a hum, or the shared warmth of proximity are the very fabric of connection, constantly weaving a shared reality in the profound quietude of the unspoken. Imagine a world where the very foundation of human interaction, language, never came to be. In the previous exploration, we stepped into a silent dawn, a realm where communication flourished through the intricate dance of gestures, the nuanced symphony of non-verbal sounds, and the raw, unfiltered expression of emotion. Understanding was not spoken, but felt, a shared resonance forged in immediate sensory input and empathetic connection. This was a world of sensory communicators, deeply rooted in the present, their perceptions unburdened by abstract labels. But how far could this profound, yet wordless existence truly stretch? Consider the immense chasm that opens when we attempt to grasp concepts beyond the immediate, the tangible, the here and now. Without the scaffolding of words, the expression of abstract ideas becomes not merely difficult, but perhaps an insurmountable challenge, an impossibility woven into the very fabric of being. How would a society, or even an individual, conceive of the past as a distinct temporal dimension, separate from the flickering images of memory? How would the future manifest beyond the anticipatory shiver of cold air hinting at winter's approach, or the instinctive pull towards a familiar berry patch? Let's take a closer look at these abstract dimensions. For us, past is a word, a category, a sequence of events we can articulate and narrate. But in a world devoid of language, conveying an event from last year's great hunt might involve a complex pantomime, a slow arcing sweep of the hand mimicking the sun's journey through many seasons, followed by a vivid reenactment of the stalking, the tension, the final plunge of the spear. The receiver might grasp the memory of the hunt, the feeling of its intensity, the image of the felled beast. They might even understand it happened before now, a general sense of prior occurrence. But the abstract concept of a year as a defined unit of time, or the past as a conceptual domain distinct from now, might remain elusive. It is a felt memory, a reverberation, not a categorized epoch. The understanding is direct, visceral, yet lacks the conceptual boundary that language provides. The air might carry the scent of damp earth, a reminder of a past rain. The worn stone beneath a hand might evoke the sensation of countless hands before, but these are sensory echoes, not verbalized histories. Similarly, the future would present a profound conceptual hurdle. Planning for tomorrow or next season would not involve verbal discussions of strategy or resource allocation. Instead, it would be a series of anticipatory actions driven by instinct and learned patterns. Observing the gradual shortening of daylight and the crispness in the air might trigger the laborious, shared effort of gathering dried wood and storing preserved food. The collective consciousness, the tightly knit group, would act in unison, guided by these environmental cues and the unspoken understanding passed through generations of imitative learning. There would be no plan articulated, but rather a collective movement towards a future state, a future condition, driven by the immediate sensory information. The concept of future as a narrative, a set of possibilities to be weighed and chosen, would not exist. It is a coming state, a felt shift, not a foreseen scenario. The mind might hold an image of a full storage pit, a feeling of security, but not the phrase, "We will fill the storage pit for winter." Beyond time, consider the intricate tapestry of human emotion and societal bonds. How would love be understood? Not merely as a fleeting warmth or physical intimacy, but as an enduring, profound connection, a commitment. Without words, it would manifest as unwavering presence, protective gestures, shared comfort in silence, the gentle press of a hand, the steady gaze. The inner world explorer would experience love as a deep resonance within, a complex interplay of warmth, belonging, and a fierce, unspoken protectiveness. It would be a constant, felt state, rather than a labeled emotion. The feeling would be no less potent, perhaps even more raw and immediate, but it would lack the conceptual framework that allows us to define, analyze, and discuss love as an abstract force in our lives. It would simply be. And what of duty or justice? These are concepts deeply rooted in abstract principles, in shared agreements and social contracts articulated through language. In a world without words, duty would likely manifest as an ingrained pattern of behavior, a collective expectation enforced through subtle social pressure rather than explicit rules. An individual failing to contribute to a task might face the chilling silence of exclusion, the averted gaze of the group, a palpable sense of disapproval that needs no verbal explanation. Justice would be even more elusive. Disputes might be resolved through immediate, often physical means, or through the subtle, unspoken arbitration of the collective consciousness, where empathy and shared emotional understanding guide the re-establishment of harmony. There would be no appeals to abstract fairness, no concept of rights, merely the immediate restoration of balance within the group's felt equilibrium. The memory of a transgression might linger as a discomfort, a tension in the air, a specific glance or posture from another, but not as a crime against the law. This leads us to a profound question about the very nature of consciousness itself. Do we think in words, or is language merely a tool to articulate thoughts that exist independently? In our linguistic reality, the inner monologue is a constant companion, a stream of verbalized thoughts, plans, memories, and self-reflections. It shapes our perception of ourselves, our self. But what would an individual's self be without this ceaseless internal narration? Imagine the inner world explorer in this silent realm. Their consciousness would not be a quiet space, but a vibrant, dynamic flow of images, sensations, and emotional resonances. A thought might manifest as a rapid succession of mental pictures, seeing a thirst-quenching stream, then the feeling of cool water, then the action of bending to drink. There would be no internal phrase like, "I am thirsty, I should go to the stream." Instead, it is a direct, intuitive impulse, a sensory memory leading to an action. Decision-making would operate on a different plane, less analytical, more instinctual. Confronted with a rustle in the undergrowth, the mind wouldn't construct a verbal assessment. Is that a predator? What are my options? Instead, it would trigger an immediate cascade of fear, an instantaneous visual recall of past dangers, a surge of adrenaline, and a direct, unmediated impulse to flee or freeze. The self in such a world would be less a narrated story and more a collection of embodied experiences, sensory memories, and roles within the immediate group. Identity would not be defined by a series of statements: I am a hunter, I am brave, I am a child of the forest. Instead, it would be a felt quality, an inherent knowing of one's place and abilities, informed by direct interaction with the world and the group. The feeling of me would be deeply tied to physical sensations, to the warmth of the sun on the skin, the ache of tired muscles, the comforting presence of kin. It would be a continuous, shifting tapestry of perceptions, rather than a fixed, verbally articulated concept. Personal history would not be recounted, but re-experienced as a tapestry of remembered sensations and emotional echoes. A moment of self-doubt might manifest as a tightening in the chest, a memory image of a failed attempt, a feeling of inadequacy that resonates deep within the core being, without the internal label of doubt. Conversely, a feeling of accomplishment might be a surge of warmth, a vivid image of success, a shared silent nod of approval from the group, a deep, satisfying hum of competence. This form of cognition is profoundly intuitive and less structured than our own. Without the labels and categories that words impose, the mind would be hyper-attuned to the subtle intricacies of its environment. An unbound perceiver would notice the most minute shifts in the wind, the precise angle of a leaf, the nuanced scent carried on the breeze. These would not be categorized as wind direction or leaf species, but would contribute to a holistic, immediate understanding of the world. A specific rustle in the leaves might not be wind, but a complex sensory input that implies approaching animal, or a change in atmospheric pressure indicating coming rain. The world itself, in its raw, unfiltered glory, would provide the vocabulary and grammar of thought. Emotional intelligence would be extraordinarily refined. Reading subtle facial shifts, the tension in a shoulder, the cadence of a non-verbal vocalization, the almost imperceptible changes in body scent. These would be the primary tools for understanding another's internal state. Empathy, a direct resonance with another's felt experience, would be the bedrock of social navigation and cohesion. The collective consciousness would operate on a level of unspoken understanding so profound it might appear almost telepathic to us, but it is merely the heightened sensitivity to every available non-verbal cue. Memory, too, would operate differently. It would be highly visual, sensory, and procedural, remembering how to do something, what something looked like, how it felt to perform a task. Less about recalling facts or abstract concepts, more about re-experiencing the physical and sensory dimensions of an event or skill. Problem solving would be a process of direct observation, trial and error, and mimicking successful actions. A broken tool would not be analyzed with internal discourse. It would be felt, manipulated, experimented with, until a solution emerged through physical action and intuitive understanding. The skilled artisan, the master hunter, the elder who guides the group, their knowledge is embodied, demonstrated, and absorbed through shared presence, not through verbal instruction. The environment in this silent world is not just a backdrop. It is an active participant in thought. The arrangement of stones, the flow of water over a riverbed, the trajectory of a thrown spear. These are not merely observed phenomena, but are understood through direct interaction, through the body's knowing, through a deep intuitive connection that bypasses conceptualization. The silence is not empty. It is filled with the hum of awareness, the constant influx of sensory information, the profound, unmediated dialogue between being and world. This intense connection to the immediate environment prevents the kind of mental abstraction that allows us to mentally leave the present, to dwell in hypothetical futures or re-narrated pasts. Instead, there is a profound, continuous state of being present. This deep immersion in the now, this profound reliance on intuitive understanding, shapes a humanity profoundly different from our own. It is a world of echoes, where thoughts are not articulated but reverberate through sensation and image, where the self is a felt presence rather than a narrated story, and where consciousness is an unbound perceiver, directly engaging with the world without the filter of words. The depth of unspoken communication, the richness of non-verbal cues, and the intensity of shared experience define this existence, pushing the boundaries of what we understand to be human cognition. Imagine a world where the very act of sharing knowledge, of passing down a skill or an insight, is transformed into an intricate, silent ballet. In a reality untouched by the invention of language, the transmission of understanding sheds its verbal layers, becoming an intensely physical and deeply embodied process. No spoken instructions guide the hand, no written manuals preserve the wisdom of generations. Instead, knowledge lives in the muscle memory, the keen eye, and the patient presence of a teacher, flowing from one being to another through the delicate art of direct imitation and demonstration. Let's take a look at how this silent learning unfolds. Consider the creation of a simple yet vital tool, like a sharpened stone blade for cutting. An experienced sensory communicator, the master craftsperson, would sit, their hands moving with practiced grace. The imitative learner, a younger individual eager to acquire the skill, would position themselves close by, their gaze unwavering, absorbing every minute detail. The master would select a suitable stone, perhaps testing its density with a subtle tap, a sound that resonates with a particular quality. They would then begin the delicate process of flint knapping, striking the core stone with another, harder stone, chipping away flakes with precise, rhythmic movements. The air might fill with the sharp scent of fractured rock, the crisp sound of impact, and the glint of newly exposed surfaces catching the light. The learner would watch, not just the hands, but the subtle shift in the master's posture, the focused intensity in their eyes, the exact angle of the strike, the pressure applied, the way the stone is held. There are no words to explain the optimal fracture mechanics, the crystalline structure of the rock, or the ideal force. The understanding must be felt, observed, and then replicated. When it is the learner's turn, they would mimic the actions, perhaps awkwardly at first. The master might offer a gentle guiding touch to adjust a grip, a subtle nod to affirm a correct motion, or a soft, low vocalization, a sigh or a hum, to indicate a misstep. This feedback is entirely non-verbal, a shared communication of effort and intention, built on empathy and a deep, unspoken bond. This process of learning, where every nuance is conveyed through movement and shared focus, means that progress in toolmaking, or any skill, is profoundly slow and incremental. Imagine trying to explain the concept of leverage or the properties of different materials without names for them. A sensory communicator might demonstrate how a heavy object can be moved with a long stick, grunting with effort at one end, then effortlessly pushing the other. The learner would see the effect, feel the difference in required force, and perhaps grasp the principle. Through direct, embodied experience. But to generalize this principle, to apply it systematically to new problems, to abstract it into a formal understanding, would be an immense challenge. It remains a specific, observed phenomenon, rather than a universal law. Without a common language to categorize and name, the distinctions between types of wood, stone, or plant would exist primarily as sensory memories. This wood feels smooth and strong, that wood splinters easily. This berry is sweet and safe, that one causes a burning sensation. Knowledge becomes deeply contextual, tied to specific objects and their observed behaviors rather than abstract labels. The sheer breadth of materials that could be understood and utilized would be limited by what could be directly encountered, experimented with, and remembered through personal experience or direct demonstration. There are no botanical names, no classifications of minerals, only the raw felt properties. Consider the implications for more complex technologies. How would one transmit the knowledge required to build something as intricate as a sophisticated trap, a finely balanced fishing spear, or even a rudimentary shelter that requires specific structural integrity? Each component, each joint, each material choice would need to be demonstrated step by step. The process of curing hides, weaving complex baskets, or shaping pottery would involve long hours of patient, silent instruction. A master would show the precise kneading of clay, the careful application of heat in a pit fire, the subtle changes in color and texture that indicate readiness. The learner would absorb this through diligent observation, the smell of burning wood, the feel of the clay, the visual cues of the firing process. The unwritten law of this world is therefore not a static collection of facts, but a living tradition, constantly enacted and reenacted. It is held within the hands, the memory, and the very bodies of the people. Elders, the most experienced imitative learners, become the vital, irreplaceable libraries of their communities. Their minds hold the sequences of actions, the subtle adjustments, the accumulated wisdom of countless trials and observations. The loss of an elder, particularly one skilled in a unique craft, would represent an irreversible loss of knowledge, a gap in the collective memory that might take generations to recover, if ever. There are no scrolls, no cave paintings serving as instructional diagrams, only the living presence. This reliance on direct transmission means that cumulative learning, the bedrock of technological advancement in our world, would proceed at a drastically different pace. In our linguistic world, one generation can record its discoveries, publish its findings, and the next generation can pick up from that point, standing on the shoulders of giants. But imagine a world where every new insight, every refined technique must be retaught from scratch, physically demonstrated to each new learner. This means that the technological ceiling of any given group would be significantly lower, and innovations would tend to be localized, slow to spread, and prone to being forgotten. Could complex technologies like metallurgy, involving the extraction and refining of metals, or sophisticated agricultural practices beyond basic planting and harvesting, ever emerge? These processes often require an understanding of transformations over time, precise control of heat, and the mixing of various components in specific ratios. Without the ability to define elements, measure quantities with precision, or articulate abstract chemical changes, such advancements would be incredibly difficult. A potter might discover that adding a certain kind of sand to clay makes it stronger, but the precise ratio would be a matter of intuition and repeated sensory judgment, not a calculated formula. The why behind the how would remain largely a mystery, understood only through repeated successful application. Think of the challenge of planning and executing a large-scale project, such as diverting a stream for irrigation or constructing a communal dwelling. Such endeavors require a shared vision, a breakdown of tasks, and coordination among many individuals. Without words to assign roles, explain objectives, or outline a sequence of steps, the coordination would rely on an extraordinary level of non-verbal communication, shared intent, and deeply ingrained social structures. A leader might point, gesture, and physically demonstrate desired actions, but complex instructions or abstract blueprints would be impossible. The collective consciousness would need to be incredibly attuned, relying on unspoken empathy and shared experience to maintain cohesion and purpose. The absence of language would also mean that common misconceptions about the natural world or inefficient techniques would persist longer and be harder to correct. There is no way to formally debate an idea, to test a hypothesis through articulated reasoning, or to share observations from distant places to refine a collective understanding. Learning is almost entirely inductive, drawing conclusions from repeated observations rather than deductive, reasoning from general principles. This means that if a particular, perhaps less efficient method of doing something is passed down, it would take a long time and many direct observed failures for a better method to organically emerge and replace it. In this silent evolution, humanity's progress would be a testament to immense patience, keen observational skills, and an unparalleled capacity for mimicry. Every improvement, every new tool, every discovered technique would be a hard-won victory, etched into the collective memory through repeated practice and physical demonstration. The inner world explorer would grapple with complex problems, their thoughts manifesting as sequences of images, sensations of material resistance, and the imagined feel of a successful outcome. The solutions, once found, would be translated into action, a silent performance for others to emulate. Thus, the entire trajectory of human development, from the simplest hand tool to the most sophisticated understanding of the environment, would be fundamentally reshaped. It would be a journey defined by the immediate, the tangible, and the deeply personal connection between teacher and learner. Innovation would not spark from a sudden, articulated insight shared across a community, but from a painstaking process of individual trial and error, followed by the slow, physical dissemination of proven methods. The unbound perceivers of this world would live in a realm where knowledge is not a concept to be discussed, but a skill to be performed, a rhythm to be felt, and a legacy to be embodied. Imagine a world where the very concept of a city, with its towering structures, bustling markets, and countless faces, simply could not take root, where the idea of a state, an abstract entity governing millions, would be utterly alien, an impossibility beyond comprehension. This is the silent reality of a humanity that never invented language, a world where the invisible scaffolding of words, which holds our complex societies together, is entirely absent. Without it, the vast, intricate tapestries of civilization as we know them unravel, leaving behind a fundamentally different human landscape. Our capacity to organize, to plan for the distant future, and to govern ourselves at scales beyond a handful of individuals is deeply intertwined with language. Think of the blueprints for a skyscraper, the legal codes of a nation, or the complex logistics of a global trade network. Each relies on the precise articulation of abstract ideas, on shared definitions, on the ability to convey intentions and instructions across time and space to people we may never meet. In a world without words, these pillars of large-scale organization simply do not exist. There are no written contracts, no spoken laws, no grand declarations of purpose that can unite disparate groups or coordinate efforts across vast distances. Instead, humanity exists in small, tightly knit groups, perhaps 20 to 50 individuals, bound not by abstract creeds or shared national identities, but by the immediate personal bonds of kinship and shared experience. These groups, often extended families or close-knit clans, are the largest stable units of human society. Their cohesion is forged through constant direct interaction, through the unspoken empathy of the collective consciousness, where emotional states are often mirrored and understood without a single sound. Trust is built on years of shared hunts, collective foraging, the warmth of communal fires, and the intimate knowledge of each other's gestures, expressions, and habitual sounds. Let's take a closer look at how such a group might operate. Imagine a task that requires more than a few hands, perhaps building a new communal shelter to withstand the coming rains, a structure larger than a simple lean-to. An elder, a sensory communicator whose wisdom is embodied in their movements and the subtle shifts of their gaze, might begin by sketching a design in the dirt with a stick, or arranging stones to represent the posts. Others, imitative learners, would watch intently, mimicking the elder's actions, perhaps picking up a stone and placing it where the elder had indicated. The process would be painstakingly slow. Each step, from felling trees with stone axes to lashing beams together with vines, would require direct demonstration, repeated until the pattern of action was absorbed. There could be no verbal instructions like, "You two, go gather the longest saplings from the riverbank, while the rest of us prepare the roof thatch." Instead, the elder might gesture towards the river, then mimic the action of pulling a long branch, then point to two individuals, perhaps making a soft, encouraging hum. Misunderstandings would be frequent. One learner might bring back branches too short. Another might return with the wrong type of wood. There would be no way to explain the reason for the specific sapling length or the function of the roof thatch beyond, showing the intended use directly. The inner world explorer might experience a profound frustration, a churning of images and feelings of inadequacy, unable to articulate the specific problem, or ask for clarification beyond a questioning glance or a frustrated sigh. This reliance on direct demonstration and immediate feedback severely limits the scale and complexity of any collective endeavor. Coordinating even 50 people on a single project would be a monumental challenge, demanding constant direct supervision and an incredible expenditure of energy to maintain synchronicity. The idea of a specialized team working independently on a component that will later integrate into a larger whole is practically impossible, as the abstract relationship between the parts cannot be conveyed. Without the ability to delegate tasks using precise instructions, or to outline a long-term plan that stretches beyond the immediate horizon, ambitious undertakings like large-scale irrigation systems, complex defensive walls, or even permanent multi-family dwellings become exceedingly difficult, if not entirely unfeasible. This constant, embodied communication ensures that any significant project remains localized, tied to the immediate presence of those involved, and rarely extends beyond the scope of a single generation's direct experience. The very concept of a city, a place where thousands, even millions of people live in close proximity, is predicated on the ability to manage complex social interactions through abstract rules and shared understanding. How would a society manage sanitation for a large urban population without the ability to articulate public health guidelines? How would resources be allocated without a system of abstract currency or complex trade agreements? The sheer sensory overload of a large, diverse crowd, each individual communicating only through gestures and emotional cues, would likely be overwhelming, fostering confusion and mistrust rather than cooperation. There would be no shared public narratives, no common stories, no abstract symbols to bind diverse groups into a single, cohesive urban identity. Each individual would remain an unbound perceiver, intensely aware of their immediate surroundings, but without the linguistic framework to categorize and organize the vastness of a city into understandable patterns. And beyond cities, the idea of a state as a political entity is fundamentally dependent on language. A state requires laws, not just immediate rules of conduct, but abstract principles of justice and governance that apply to everyone, regardless of personal acquaintance. How would such laws be formulated, transmitted, or enforced without words? There would be no written constitutions, no verbal decrees, no courts where grievances are articulated and judged against an impersonal standard. Conflicts, when they arise between individuals or within a group, would be resolved through direct emotional expression, physical dominance, or the subtle, unspoken pressure of the collective consciousness. If someone took another's tool, there would be no concept of property rights to appeal to, only the immediate reaction of the wronged individual, the group's sympathetic or disapproving gestures, and perhaps a direct physical confrontation or ostracism. The resolution of disputes would be immediate and visceral, lacking any long-term legal framework. Imagine a dispute over hunting grounds between two different family groups. Without the ability to negotiate, to articulate boundaries, or to agree upon shared resources through a treaty, such encounters would likely escalate quickly into tense standoffs, resolved perhaps by a show of force, or a slow, uneasy retreat based on immediate emotional reads. The concept of a neutral arbiter, someone who could objectively weigh facts and apply abstract principles, simply wouldn't exist, as the very tools for objective articulation are missing. This pervasive lack of abstract communication means that large-scale societal structures like states cannot form. There would be no shared identity beyond the immediate family or clan, no national borders beyond the natural geographical features or the effective range of a group's direct influence. The idea of a common enemy, a threat to all humanity, would be impossible to convey or unite against, as such a concept requires a shared understanding of a distant, abstract danger. Each group would remain an island, deeply connected internally, but largely isolated from others, their interactions limited to wary observation, occasional direct trade of immediate goods, or swift, often violent confrontation. The collective consciousness within each small group would be immensely powerful, fostering deep empathy and a profound sense of belonging. Decisions would likely emerge from a shared intuition, a slow convergence of gestures and emotional resonance until a consensus is felt, rather than articulated. A leader might emerge not through election or verbal decree, but through consistent, effective demonstration, their actions implicitly guiding the group. Their authority would stem from their ability to inspire confidence through their presence, their skill, and their intuitive understanding of the group's unspoken needs. But this powerful bond, this profound intimacy, could not scale. It would be fundamentally limited by the number of individuals one could know intimately, whose expressions and nuances one could instinctively interpret. In this silent world, humanity's trajectory would be one of persistent fragmentation. The slow accumulation of knowledge, as explored previously, would keep technological progress minimal. The inability to coordinate large-scale efforts would prevent the development of agriculture beyond small, localized plots, or the construction of permanent settlements that could sustain dense populations. Population growth would be naturally curtailed by the limitations of resource management and the vulnerability of small groups to environmental shifts, disease, or inter-group conflicts that could not be resolved through negotiation. The world would remain largely wild, shaped by the immediate needs and intuitive responses of these scattered, silent communities. This constant, embodied communication ensures that any significant project remains localized, tied to the immediate presence of those involved, and rarely extends beyond the scope of a single generation's direct experience. The profound irony is that while language separates us from the immediate, raw experience of the unbound perceiver, by filtering it through definitions, it simultaneously allows us to build bridges between countless minds, to create shared realities, and to construct the complex, sprawling civilizations we inhabit. Without this capacity, the human spirit, while perhaps experiencing a deeper, more immediate connection to its immediate surroundings and its intimate group, remains forever confined, unable to build the grand, abstract structures that define our current existence. The silent world fosters deep immediate bonds, but erects an invisible wall between groups, preventing the grand tapestry of civilization. It is a common assumption, perhaps born from our own intimate experience, that thought itself is synonymous with language. We often hear an inner voice, a stream of words that narrates our day, plans our future, or dissects our past. This gives rise to a compelling question. If words had never been invented, would thought, as we understand it, even exist? The answer, according to careful consideration, is a resounding yes, though its form would be profoundly different from the verbal tapestry of our own minds. To imagine thinking without words, one must first shed the notion of internal monologue. The inner world explorer in this voiceless reality does not deliberate in sentences. Instead, their cognition unfolds as a rich, fluid tapestry of sensory impressions, mental images, and felt sensations. Imagine a complex problem, such as how to cross a turbulent river. Our thought process might involve verbalizing options. Should I build a raft? Find a shallower spot? Look for a fallen log? For an inner world explorer, this process would manifest as a rapid sequence of mental simulations. They might visualize the river's currents, the texture of different logs, the feel of their hands shaping branches, the sensation of balancing on unstable ground, and the potential splash of failure. Each thought is a mini experience, a sensory projection of possibility, evaluated not by logical propositions, but by an intuitive assessment of its felt outcome. This form of cognition is intensely practical and grounded in immediate reality. When an individual seeks to understand a new tool, an imitative learner observes the sensory communicator not just for the physical steps, but for the nuanced shifts in their body, the subtle expressions of focus or effort, the rhythm of their breath. Their internal processing isn't about naming the parts or verbalizing the instructions. It's about internalizing the feel of the action, the flow of the movement, the texture of the material as it responds. The thought process becomes an embodied one, where understanding is synonymous with the ability to replicate and feel the correct execution. This kind of thinking, while lacking the explicit structure of language, excels in pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, and an almost instinctual grasp of material properties. It is a world where understanding is less about knowing that and more about knowing how. This leads us to a fascinating dichotomy. Language, undoubtedly, stands as one of humanity's most transformative inventions. It is the architect of civilization, the scaffold upon which abstract thought is built, allowing us to share complex ideas, record histories, and project ourselves into distant futures. Without it, the grand narratives of nations, the intricate theories of science, and the nuanced philosophies of existence would be impossible. We build complex societies and technologies because we can articulate shared visions, codify laws, and transmit knowledge across generations with unprecedented precision. The ability to name, categorize, and define has allowed us to dissect the world, understand its components, and then reassemble them in new, innovative ways. This capacity for abstraction is a hallmark of our linguistic reality, allowing us to operate not just in the immediate present, but across vast spans of time and conceptual space. Yet, this very power of language, this profound gift, might also function as a filter, subtly shaping and sometimes limiting our direct perception of the world. Words, by their nature, are discrete labels. They categorize, define, and delineate. When we see a tree, we immediately categorize it as tree. This is incredibly efficient for communication and organization, but it also means we often perceive the label before we fully absorb the raw, unfiltered sensory data of the object itself. The unique texture of its bark, the specific curve of its branches, the subtle variations in its green leaves, the particular way the light filters through them. These nuances can be overlooked as our minds quickly move to the general category. Consider the unbound perceiver in this world without words. Their experience is one of profound, unmediated sensory richness. When they encounter what we would call a tree, they don't see a tree. They experience a complex symphony of visual information. The interplay of light and shadow on textured bark, the specific scent of damp earth and chlorophyll, the rustle of individual leaves in the breeze, the subtle shift in air temperature beneath its canopy, the earthy taste of the air, and the feeling of its rooted presence in the ground. Each encounter is fresh, holistic, and deeply immersive, without the mind immediately imposing a pre-existing category. The world is not a collection of labeled objects, but a continuous, flowing tapestry of interconnected sensations. This unfiltered perception extends beyond mere objects to encompass relationships and emotions. Without words to define love or anger as distinct abstract concepts, these emotions are experienced as raw, powerful forces. An unbound perceiver understands the distress of another, not through a verbal explanation of sadness, but through the subtle tremor in their breathing, the slump of their shoulders, the downcast gaze, the very atmosphere around them. Empathy becomes a direct, visceral resonance, unburdened by the need to analyze or interpret through a linguistic lens. The intention behind a gesture, the mood of a shared silence, the unspoken history between individuals, these are absorbed directly, intuitively, and without the mediation of words that might sometimes misrepresent or dilute the true sentiment. Our linguistic world, while granting us immense power, also introduces a layer of interpretation. We describe a sunset as beautiful or majestic, and these words, while evocative, also guide our perception. We look for the beauty and the majesty that the words suggest. An unbound perceiver experiences the sunset not through these predefined filters, but as an overwhelming cascade of color, a primal shift in light, a felt connection to the vastness of the sky and the cyclical rhythm of the world. It is a direct, unfiltered communion with the phenomenon itself, where the experience is the understanding, without the need for an explanatory internal narrative. This is not to say that one form of perception is inherently superior to the other, but rather that they are fundamentally different. Our language-rich world allows for unparalleled precision, abstract reasoning, and the building of vast, complex knowledge systems. We can debate subtle philosophical distinctions, invent entirely new concepts, and share highly specific information across immense distances and generations. We have gained the ability to manipulate and understand the world through a powerful conceptual framework. But in doing so, we might have traded some of that raw, immediate sensory immersion, that direct, unmediated connection to the world as it simply is. The filter of language means that our minds are constantly categorizing, analyzing, and interpreting, even before conscious thought fully forms. This process is incredibly efficient, allowing us to navigate a complex world with ease. But it also means that our perception is always, to some extent, a constructed reality, shaped by the words and concepts we possess. The individual in a world without words experiences reality in a state of continuous discovery, where every moment is a fresh input, unburdened by the labels and narratives that define our own linguistic existence. Their connection to the environment, to each other, and to their own internal states is one of deep, intuitive presence, where the world speaks to them not in words, but in the eloquent language of sensation, emotion, and direct experience. This profound difference in perception underlies every aspect of their existence, shaping their understanding of self, their relationships, and their place in the silent, vibrant world. Imagine a world where the very air, though filled with sound, held no words. A world where the intricate dance of human interaction unfolded through a symphony of gestures, the nuanced shifts of facial expressions, and the deep resonance of shared emotion. This is the silent path humanity might have walked, had language, as we know it, never taken root. We have journeyed through this hypothetical reality, exploring the profound transformations its absence would bring to every facet of existence. Consider the daily rhythm of life for individuals in such a world. Communication would be a constant, intuitive ballet. A mother would convey comfort, not with soothing words, but with the gentle, rhythmic sway of her body, the soft brush of her hand against her child's cheek, and a low, humming vocalization that resonates with warmth. Danger would be signaled by an abrupt shift in posture, a sharp, quick intake of breath, and the wide, alert eyes of a watchful elder, instantly understood by those attuned to their non-verbal cues. Every interaction would demand intense presence, a deep reading of another's subtle signals, creating bonds woven from empathy and immediate shared experience rather than articulated thoughts. The meaning would not be in a sequence of sounds, but in the entire context, the environment, the history between individuals, the immediate situation, all contributing to a rich, if unspoken, understanding. Without the structured framework of words, the landscape of the human mind would be profoundly different. An inner world explorer would navigate their thoughts not through a stream of internal monologue, but through a vivid tapestry of images, sensations, and felt emotions. Recalling a past event might involve replaying a sequence of sensory memories: the warmth of a fire, the scent of a particular plant, the feeling of exertion from a long journey, each contributing to a holistic, non-linear understanding of what transpired. Planning for the future would manifest as a series of mental simulations, a sequence of imagined actions and their anticipated sensory outcomes. rather than a verbal strategy. Concepts we define with single words, like justice or freedom, would be understood as complex emotional states, specific reactions to certain behaviors, or deeply ingrained communal expectations felt and embodied rather than articulated as abstract principles. The self would be a collection of experiences, relationships, and embodied knowledge, rather than a narrative constructed and reinforced by language. The transmission of knowledge, the very engine of human progress, would be an entirely different endeavor. Imagine trying to explain the intricate process of flint knapping, shaping stone into a precise tool, without a single word. An imitative learner would watch, intensely focused, observing every subtle twist of the wrist, the angle of the strike, the precise pressure applied. The teacher, a sensory communicator, would guide with their own hands, demonstrating, correcting through gentle adjustments to grip or posture, and offering encouraging or disapproving sounds. This direct embodied learning, while incredibly effective for practical skills, would be painstakingly slow. Each generation would have to relearn much through direct observation, and complex innovations would struggle to spread beyond their immediate originators. The cumulative knowledge that built our civilizations, allowing us to stand on the shoulders of giants, would be severely limited, a fragile legacy carried in the living memory and practice skills of individuals. This inherent limitation on knowledge transfer and abstract thought would profoundly shape human society. Large-scale organization, the bedrock of cities and states, would be virtually impossible. How could a leader articulate a vision for a community of 10,000 individuals, explain a complex system of laws, or coordinate a vast irrigation project spanning many miles, all without the shared abstraction of language? Instead, humanity would likely remain in small, tightly knit groups, perhaps no larger than a few hundred individuals, where trust, cooperation, and conflict resolution could be managed through direct personal relationships, shared history, and immediate emotional cues. The collective consciousness of these groups would be powerful, built on unspoken empathy and mutual understanding, but it would not extend far beyond the immediate horizon or the direct experience of its members. The concept of a unified nation, a shared identity based on abstract principles, would simply not exist. In reflecting upon this silent world, we confront a profound paradox. While language is undoubtedly humanity's greatest gift, a tool that unlocked unprecedented levels of cooperation, abstract thought, and cultural transmission, it also acts as a subtle filter, mediating our direct experience of reality. In our linguistic world, we categorize, label, and interpret everything. A tree is not just a tree. It's an oak, a maple, a specific species with a name and a set of characteristics. This categorization allows for immense knowledge and communication, but it also places a layer between us and the raw, uninterpreted sensation of the tree itself. The rough texture of its bark, the specific scent of its leaves after rain, the way light filters through its canopy. For the unbound perceiver in a world without words, the experience would be one of profound, unmediated sensory richness. Emotions would not be named joy or sorrow, but felt as visceral currents, distinct energies moving through the body, deeply connected to their triggers and expressions. A sunset would not be beautiful. It would be an overwhelming cascade of color and light, a felt experience that washes over the entire being, without the need for a descriptive label. Relationships would be understood through the intricate dance of shared glances, comforting touches, and sympathetic presence. A deep, unspoken resonance that bypasses the need for verbal declarations of affection or loyalty. This unfiltered perception would foster an intense connection to the present moment, a holistic understanding where meaning is synonymous with direct, embodied experience. This thought experiment compels us to acknowledge the unique path our own humanity has taken, irrevocably shaped by the invention of words. Language allowed us to weave intricate tapestries of shared stories, to articulate complex scientific theories, to build vast civilizations, and to ponder the very nature of our existence across generations. It granted us the power to transcend the immediate, to remember the distant past with precision, and to plan for a future far beyond our individual lifespans. It is the invisible architecture of our societies, the very medium through which we construct our realities and connect across time and space. Yet, as we consider the silent path, we are left to contemplate the profound beauty and the inherent limitations of a world experienced without the rich tapestry of articulated meaning. The beauty lies in the unmediated connection, the heightened sensory awareness, the deep, empathetic bonds forged in silence. The limitations are equally stark. The slow crawl of progress, the vulnerability of knowledge, the inability to unite beyond small, intimate circles, and perhaps a different, less conceptually elaborate form of thought. Ultimately, this journey into a voiceless world is not just a philosophical exercise. It is a mirror. It asks us to look at our own linguistic reality and ponder its profound influence. What does language give us? What, if anything, does it obscure or filter? How does the constant inner monologue shape our sense of self, our understanding of the world, and our relationships with others? By imagining a humanity without words, we gain a deeper appreciation for the silent, often unnoticed power of the language that defines us, allowing us to reflect on the very essence of what it means to be human in our own articulate world.